All right, well let's get underway. And Jay Bob, everyone, happy Thanksgiving. Uh, well, why don't we start by a moment to just give thanks to Baba. It takes more than a moment in Baba's case, but nevertheless, we'll give it a moment and just give thanks to Baba that we're here and that he's with us. Jay Baba, everyone, Jay Baba.
Baba.
So earlier today, Wendy and I and Christopher and some of our family, we were having Thanksgiving, and I was reminded of the Thanksgivings with because Wendy people brought up Kitty, and we were talking about Kitty and then Elizabeth and Margaret, and so those Thanksgivings were of course extremely special in my life and Wendy's because there they all were, and all their glory, their humor and wisdom and life with Baba. So Elizabeth at the head of the table, and then Kitty was there, and the jump up seat, so she could get up and get whatever people needed. Margaret was there, and uh, and I remember one every year at Thanksgiving and Christmas that I was there. Elizabeth would begin by, raising a glass means water glass. That's as that's as wild as it got. And she would toast Baba, and she would say something like, "Well, to Baba, she said, after all, without Baba, we wouldn't all be here." So this was her usual toast. But one year she got mischievous, and I don't know what happened, but she raised her glass and she said, "To Baba, without Baba, we wouldn't all be here. We wouldn't even know each other, and we might not want to." We all laughed. That's very funny. And a little as she used to say, well, it may be amusing, but it might be a little too amusing. But it's true. We wouldn't know each other, and maybe we wouldn't choose to know each other. But in him, we become a family. So that's the wonderful part. And then sometimes we'd go around the table and do what many families do, and we would say what we were grateful for. We'd share something of what we were grateful for, and of course, in our lives with Baba, I'm sure you feel this way too. That question could be a little overwhelming. Where to begin, and as Wendy would say, how much time do you have? Uh, but of all the possible answers, I've always thought Erich, as usual, may have said it best when he said, "People thank the Lord for different reasons. Some thank him for the bounties he has bestowed on them, some for keeping them alive, and others for granting them a good harvest throughout the year." He says, "I thank the Lord for allowing us to breathe so that we are alive to remember him and love him wholeheartedly." Yeah, that's it. Um, so today, when thinking about speaking about Bob on Thanksgiving, I thought, well, wouldn't it be a good thing to share a glimpse into the life of someone who lived only to breathe Baba, if you will, and uh, and certainly that was among others, Countess Nadine Tolstoy, who, as I'm sure you all know, or many of you know, one of Baba's closest Western disciples, probably not as well known as some others, but nevertheless, you know that. Um, and for the past several years, she's been very much on my mind and Christopher's mind because we've been putting together a book of out of her papers, which we inherited. And so we're going to, her letters, her notebooks kept in India, all of this, it's time to get out to the world. It's probably past time. And so we're putting that all together, and it will come out by Baba's grace. It'll come out next year. Sherry R is publishing it soon, maybe early. We don't know. And we're also telling her story in addition to publishing her papers. So anyway, she's been on our minds, and I have to be honest and say, I grew up with Elizabeth and Kitty and Margaret, as I've mentioned, and I knew a great deal about Narina Machabelli because she was very much a presence and part of my life because of Elizabeth, even though I didn't meet her. But what struck us as we were learning about Nadine, looking more closely and reading correspondence and things one doesn't, we'd never really seen before, and the trunks, that hadn't been opened, some of them in what, 70 years or however long. She died in 1946, so, and then Elizabeth, stored the trunks, and there it all is, you see. So, and both of us were struck, I think, by the same thing, and that is, here's a disciple who through complete surrender to Baba, to his will, complete surrender, came to see everything as his will, even in great suffering, and was deeply grateful to Baba for sustaining her in every moment. I mean, it strikes me, and many of you, I'm sure, have the same thought, that many around Baba who are very close to him, let's say in his circle, exemplified some quality, that Baba wanted to especially emphasize, or maybe he was working on the world through this particular disciple and this quality. I don't know, but I don't want to try to understand Baba's ways, but I think we all feel like these close ones were that, and in her case, surrender. From the time she met Baba at Harmon on the Hudson in 1931, that first trip, until the day she breathed her last in 1946. Nadine Tolstoy lived only for her beloved Baba. 15 years, and every minute that we can see, she was just wholeheartedly focused on living just she only wanted Baba. Now, before she met Mayor Baba in 1931, she had actually searched for a master for some years. And she had tried many different avenues, and she was a yoga student of I think Yogananda, and she was this, and so she did a serious search, and she married twice along the way, and the second marriage, of course, famously was to Ilya Tolstoy, who was the son of Count Leo Tolstoy, the great novelist, and hence her name and her title, which she carried the rest of her life. I think it really became part of her work for Baba that she carried around the title. Baba used it, Countess Nadine Tolstoy, just like he used Princess Narita Machabelli. Those titles seem to work like magic, for many in the world, and there we are. And Baba used it. But at the age of 48, she came into Baba's presence, his physical presence. And she later wrote about that moment. She said, I felt his deep seeing eyes beyond that which we can see, reading that open book of me, working within me. He was my master. That was her first glimpse, first impression. She knew after all that waiting, meeting all these different people and all that, he was. And when he came a year later, she saw Baba again, and this time in New York City, and this time she brought her husband. Uh, uh, he he was a special man in many ways, and a spiritually inclined man. And he would soon after meeting Baba die. She cared for him until he died. So, but in 1932, he did get the chance to meet Baba, and when she saw Baba the second time, her, she said Baba revealed himself to her as the Christ. She said, I saw the Christ before me as he was seated on the couch. In the expression of all his figure and his divinely lit up face, in his eyes beaming love that no words can describe as they radiate the power of flame. His Christ-like luminous and healing power brought me to his feet. And on my knees, I sobbed in tears of repentance, joy, and gratitude. Baba met many people on these trips, as you know, did many things, Hollywood and this place, that, London, Paris. But to a few, he gave a glimpse. He gave something more of who he was. And when he did that, that was it, you know, it was all over. They recognized themselves and they recognized the Christ. And so for that time on, all Nadine wanted to do, all she wanted to do was to love and serve Baba, beloved Baba. She had opportunities in the early 30s to travel with Baba in Europe and California and so forth. So we try to tell a little of that in the book, but not, you know, I mean, the point is that she had those opportunities, but when she wasn't traveling with Baba, when she was just in her life, and of course she was trying to care for her husband who died in 33, so she had some time in there where it was a big part of her life is he was dying. And she told everyone she could about Baba, you know, everyone she could. She had public events. One with Elizabeth helped her to organize in Chicago, you know, where public events where people would come and she would tell them about Baba. And that was all she wanted to do, was let them know. And she also, I think at Baba's urging, she let all the Russian, uh, uh, you know, what do you call them, exiles or people who had to leave Russia, many of them white Russians, meaning they were people who didn't support the Bolsheviks, and many of them were forced to leave. Many of them were like her, born in what we call Ukraine now, and she was actually Ukrainian. And doing all that, she would, and some of them were quite famous. You know, there was an opera star person. There was a, you know, I don't know, famous this and that. I can't tell you all these people whose names have been sort of lost to history mostly, but some are actually still known. But she tried everything she could to let them know about him, that he was here, that he was here. They should know that he was here. And and she gave everything she had to Baba. And you say, well, she gave her energy, she gave her life, but she also, whatever money she had, whatever, anything she could give, she wanted to give it to him. She didn't have much. You know, she and Count Tolstoy were actually quite poor. He went around the country lecturing, and he wrote a book about his father, but he never had the success of his father. And he, you know, he met famous people, Theodore Roosevelt, William Jennings Bryan, and, you know, he was known, but not, they didn't make much money. So They didn't have that much. And when he died, there was a small, very small estate, uh, and Nadine was determined that it all should go to Baba. You know, she wanted to send it right away. I think she sent a good bit right away to Baba. I don't know how she thought she was going to live, but that's that's how she was. You know, he was all there was, all there is. You know, and she wrote, Baba wrote to her some, and during this period I'm talking about, and one of the things he said in the letter, he said, "Remember that I am always with you and in you, and there is nothing in this universe which matters excepting me. There is no other reality. I know that you are wholly mine and how deeply you love me. And I also, through this miracle of love, am yours." So in 1936, Baba called her to India, and she was, of course, ecstatic uh, to live in the Gnostic ashram. And she arrived late in 36 and then started to live there for the period that it was open until it closed in 38. And later, after a hiatus between the two, she went to Switzerland and did other things for Baba. Baba called her back, and she lived in the ashram on the hill with the other Western women and Eastern women. And one of the things she did, which is quite interesting, Baba put her in charge of something new he had created up on the hill, which was a maternity hospital. And she had no experience, but she learned on the job quite quickly. She was very good at it, apparently. Baba said to her, he said, "Nadine, there are thousands of hospitals in the world. I could have thousands of nurses to work. If I have given this work in the hospital to you, is because I want you to learn serving in real spirit, selfless service." And Baba took great interest in it. You know, he waited outside in the waiting room with some, like the waiting father, for when the first woman had a baby. Baba waited and wanted to see the baby as soon as it was born. Yeah, so it was quite a time for her, and she loved being there. And then they went on the Blue Bus tour, so she went on the Blue Bus tours with Baba all around India. And of course, the Blue Bus tours were, as you well know, in that wonderful book of the Blue Bus tours, they were must tours, at heart. I mean, Baba was looking for musts everywhere, which was one of these great parts of Baba's life, as the Wayfarer's account demonstrates later, that is so, I think, my view, for what it's worth, most revealing of Baba and his work of anything else in his life. And I think, for me, the Wayfarers is the one account where I really feel I'm getting a glimpse into his real work. In any case, she went with him all around India, and then, of course, there was that day-to-day experience of living in the ashram with these other women, which wasn't easy. I mean, uh, she was kind of a loner, and she had to deal with people who all had quirks. I mean, Helen Dom was not the easiest person to get along with, for example. and there were clashes and ego. So Baba was working all this out with them. And as you've read these accounts, you know this very well. And they're such wonderful accounts. Uh, um, One little one that we put in the book because we thought it was so I don't know, typical of the day-to-day kinds of things, the little things. Baba's, to me, has always been in the details and the little things more than anything else. And so, and the grinding down that he was doing is always in these little ways, just these uh, little teeny things that later doesn't seem important at all. But in all of them, Baba was turning their consciousness, of course, from the world to him. That was the whole work he was doing with them, as you know. And so that was the point of all these little conflicts. He was just grinding them down, to nothingness. And so there were these egos clashing every day, so it had to be day by day, grind, 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 if you will. And so one of these conflicts was over shoe polish, of all things, if you can imagine, shoe polish. But they didn't have very much. And Baba was very particular about the budget. And one had to be very careful. You just couldn't just order what you wanted. Baba limited that, and he checked every single thing, every list, how much, how many, why do you need this, why do you need that, and why are you buying this and that? Baba was right on top of it, and every penny had to be used wisely and not misspent, in his name. That was very, very important to Baba. But Narina, so that's how Narina and Nadine ended up sharing a little thing of shoe polish. They both shared this this shoe polish, and you wouldn't get more for a long time, so you had to be careful. And so Nadine was careful, it was her nature. So when she'd take off the shoe polish, she would take a little and she'd do, polish her shoes, and then she'd carefully put the lid back on so it wouldn't dry out. But apparently when Narina went in to take off to use the shoe polish, she had the habit of taking it off and using a lot, and then leaving the lid off of, worse yet, and it would dry out. And Nadine got very irritated at all this, and so it came out in front of Baba. Baba drew them out about this conflict they were having, and so they were back and forth, and in this sort of fierce conversation about it, but in front of Baba. And finally, after they settled down a little bit, Baba told them, "Now forget it. It's finished. And now embrace." And Nadine and Narina each stood motionless for a moment. And they were finding it very difficult to switch gears suddenly and hug one another. And Mani recounts this incident, and she says, this is what she recounts when she's watching this scene unfold. She said, we're holding our breath. And Baba innocently looks around at us and says, "Look at them." I said, "Embrace," and they're both standing there. At that, I still remember, Mani writes, Nadine lifted her hand, and it was like it was made of lead, but she slowly raised it. And the moment she did that, Narina flung out her arms and they both embraced. And when Baba does it, Mani writes, it is really finished, wiped out. And Mani continues to say, well, that evening she walked with Nadine. They were just walking together outside. And Nadine said, "Oh, Mani, if it could have been a disagreement over something great, something spiritual, or something for Baba, but shoe polish?" Mani responded, "Nadine, nothing is too small for Baba. He shaped his disciples even with the smallest things that served as props for his work." Nadine was a very one-pointed person, and Baba was the focus. And her love for Baba was very one-pointed. And that also meant sometimes she was not very easy for others to get along with. And so Baba wrote to Irene Bilo about this trait in 1938. at that point, Baba had sent Nadine to Switzerland to do some work for him and so forth, and she was staying with Irene Bilo, and Baba wrote to her, so she must have complained to Baba about something that Nadine was doing and or not doing, and Baba wrote to her and said, Nadia is a very loving soul and loves me deeply. It is the expression of that deep love which at times gets on some people's nerves. But be kind and loving to her. We are all one, and these little irritations are only surface ones. They cannot affect the love we have for each other deep down. One day on the Hill, Baba was speaking to the Western women about the importance of relying solely on him. The topic came up, and Baba wanted to talk about that. Rely solely on him. Baba said, I don't mean that you can't be friends with one another. That's fine. Be friends and all that. It's a good thing. Friendships are fine. But devotees of Baba must lean only on Baba, not on one another. And then he gave an example, which was hypothetical. You know, picked out Narina. He said, Narina, Hetty, you know, Narina leans on Hetty. Now, I'm not sure that's the case or not, but this is the example Baba gave. And they were both there. But then he said, she leans on Hetty, you know, so if Hetty left me, what would happen to Narina? And then he pointed to Nadine and he said, Nadine is most fortunate. She wants to lean, but has no one to lean on. Her nature does not agree with anyone's. She is most loving and wants to do everything for me. She would speak for me even on the top of Mount Everest with only the snow to hear her. Once, I don't remember when it was, but Elizabeth was asked about Nadine and what life was like for her in the ashram, and maybe I asked. Anyway, I remember her response. I hope that I've gotten it correct. She said, well, one day she approached Baba and she was weeping, she was distraught, and Baba spelt out on the board, what is the matter? And through her tears, Nadine managed to say, Baba, no one loves me. They all hate me. Baba said, is that so? No one loves you? And Nadine said, no one, Baba, no one loves me. Baba smiled and he said, ask, does Kippy love you? Kippy, of course, being the Elizabeth's Boston Terrier, who loved everyone and was a very great favorite of Baba's and the whole ashram. Uh, and Kippy loved everybody. Nadine was silent for a moment, and then she had to reluctantly admit, yes, Baba, Kippy loves me. Then Baba asked, and does Baba love you? Oh, yes, Baba. I know you love me. Then Baba looked into her eyes and he said, what more do you need? What more do you need? So in 1941, that life came to an end because that's the year Baba called Nadine, Norina, and Elizabeth to him, and he told them he wanted them to return to America, to the United States, and work for him, spread his message of love and truth in America, do his work. Now, as we know from that period in that history, if we know anything about the work that was being done in America for Baba, when they got back, they all came back together and they all lived in an apartment together in New York City. And they only came back, of course, to do the work, whatever it was Baba wanted. And Baba was very specific in the case, as you know, of Norina and Elizabeth. He gave them the task of finding a universal center here in the United States and a home for him. And he gave them all the conditions and all those things that you know. And so that was their major task. I mean, and in addition to that, Norina saw her work as uh, uh, speaking for Baba, and she began to speak for Baba in a way that was more literal than just giving lectures about Baba. She took up thought transmission or thought order, she called it both things, in which she said, Baba spoke through her, and so she was directly giving his messages in public lectures and so forth. So that was what she considered something very important in her work for Baba. So we see that, we know that, we see them working and doing all these things. But what about Nadine? Nadine is very rarely mentioned, about the 40s and Baba's work in America. So what did she do? I mean, she did, help Norina some, and she was the person that was designated, to interview people if they were going to come to Norina's Sunday gatherings, small gatherings in the apartment, in which Norina would give messages from Baba, thought transmission. So she had that job, and little things like that. And she would sometimes be the one to transcribe some of what Norina gave, and then have it type it up and disseminate it like that. So she had that job. But what was her job for Baba beyond that, being a helper to Norina to some extent? And Baba answered it, what her work was, in a cable he sent in 1946 that arrived in February 1946, 2 months before Nadine died in April. And in that cable, it was to Norina, he was describing how some of them worked for him. And when he got to Nadine, he said, Nadine's work for him is life's surrender. Life's surrender. And when I first saw that, I thought, yes, that's what she was working on for him. And maybe for the world, who knows? But her final years really sharpened for us what Baba may have probably meant by that. In 1944, she began to have symptoms of what would later be diagnosed as ALS, which is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And as I'm sure you know, it's a progressive neurodegenerative illness that affects nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord, and it results in loss of muscle control, and it's a fatal condition. And when it progresses, people lose their ability to eat, to speak, to move, to breathe. It's a devastating illness. And people in those days didn't know much about it. The doctors didn't really have much idea about it, and for a while when she was going to doctors, they didn't know what it was. They had different things, and then they finally settled on that. Um, and she cabled to Baba in 1944 as her condition worsened, and she said, beloved Baba, no definite diagnosis, seemingly nerves with partial atrophy, muscles, hands, and legs, have speech difficulty, need your guidance and blessings. And Baba's response by cable was, take necessary treatment, don't worry, blessings. The first serious symptoms she had were difficulty swallowing and persistent choking. These symptoms grew worse to the extent that she couldn't even swallow pills that the doctor had prescribed her, and she had to crush them instead or have someone do it. And eating was such a tedious task uh, that she would only do it while alone, hoping that somehow that would help her to relax the tightness in her throat if she stayed completely quiet. Adele, many of you knew well. Adele Walken and Phyllis were living there with them, helping them. They were quite young and very inexperienced in everything, just new people to the world, very young women. And Adele was given the task of helping Nadine. And so Nadine trained her to be a nurse because, she'd had the maternity hospital experience and she knew something about nursing and, how to massage, how to prepare food. She even had instructions for taking care of the pet canary, Nadine's pet canary. She said, when you feed the bird, you say over and over again, Baba loves you. Baba loves you. That was her instruction. And at some point, she couldn't speak any longer, so she had to use an alphabet board like Baba. She had a board that she would spell out what she wanted to convey. Um, and as speech became more and more difficult, she could do less and less, of course, but she still continued to see people uh, and try to convey Baba to them who would come. She wanted to see them. And Adele describes this period this way. She fortunately left a little bit of an account of what it was like. And she says, during the course of her illness, the intensity of her pure love showed itself in daily life. Some friends who came with the intention to console her found themselves, as I did, uplifted by an atmosphere of pure, vibrant life. An atmosphere benevolent and harmonious in effect. One felt disarmed. Who was there to console in the face of how could you console her in the face of such goodwill and cheer? Adele says visitors would generally be greeted by her beautiful smile, glowing eyes, and she never lost her sense of humor. And during this period, Nadine, of course, would write to Baba, and she would tell him of her determination to focus only on him, despite the degeneration of her body. And she told Baba of her one longing or one desire was to see him again, to see him again. You see, in the 1940s, they expected him to come at any moment. He said, I will come soon, I will come soon. And that's why they were rushing to get things ready, and including at the center. The cabin on the hill was built, immediately, so Baba would have a place to stay, and he could come at any moment. And so naturally, as she got worse and worse, she wanted more and more for him to come because, how much time did she have? And she implored him to return to the United States. But it was during this period that Nadine experienced not just his absence, but his presence. Among the treasured things she kept uh, by her bed was a small photo of Baba taken in England in 1931. You all know it. It's one of the series of photos taken um, in Imam Studios, I guess you would say. Um, anyway, this is the photo she kept by her bed. And on the back, uh, she wrote, uh, Messiah 1944. And she put a message in there that Baba had sent to them in a cable. Love me and live in the thought of me till I come. Nadine loved that so much. She wrote it on different slips of paper and she had it different places in her room and on this photo by her bed. Love me and live in me, live in the thought of me till I come. Embracing his presence, love me and live in the thought of me and his absence till I come. And in correspondence, Baba reassured Nadine that he knew the agony of her separation and he promised her more and more of his presence. So on May 7th, 1945, now this is just a year before she died, at Baba's directive, Baba's secretary, Adi Kairani, sent Nadine the following message. Baba received your letter of March 29 in your own hand. He read it and reread it. He was touched to read it. He was happy you wrote it. Through pain and suffering, a deep sense of separation predominates your being. Separation from Baba, and he knows it. He knows everything as you know well, and with us, he is ever present. Baba says, he is with you. You will feel it more and more. And then a few months before she died, Nadine received a very beautiful affirmation of Baba's love for her in a letter written at Baba's directive by Margaret Krask, who was still in India. And Margaret wrote, I snatched an opportunity to tell him, Baba, I was writing to you. And he said, tell her I love her. It sounded so beautiful, Margaret writes, when spelt on the board. Not give her my love, but tell her I love her. We all felt so happy for you that he should express it in such a lovely, simple way. And I know it is all you really want. And Adele, meanwhile, there every day with her, she witnessed Nadine's complete surrender to Baba's will. She wrote later, she said, Nadine not only showed cheerfulness, often through her physical suffering, but more of a spiritual victory lay in her surrender to the beloved's will not to see him again. During the course of her illness, she somehow always expected to actually see Baba again upon his return to America. She had a most ardent and insatiable yearning to remain alive only to see him. Thus, it was a great privilege to see her beautiful surrender through the descent of his grace of love. As Nadine's condition worsened and worsened, she became increasingly aware of Baba with her, helping her, and in perfect surrender.
All right, let's see what's up. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and read this nice quote, assuming that Charles will, he'll jump back on. Um, this is Lord Mayher. Nadine Tolstoy came for Baba's darshan one day. Finally, uh, after waiting a long time, she had her interview. Seeing him again, her faith in Baba was confirmed and she surrendered to him forever. This was after her first meeting with him at Harmon on the Hudson. My intuition was unquestioning and sure, she recorded. I saw Christ before me as he was seated on the couch in the expression of all his figure and divinely lit up face, in his eyes beaming love. It was the fulfillment of a long awaited meeting, the climax of my life. Leaving the room, she loudly shouted, Jesus Christ! And the onlookers turned and gazed at her. Nadine later explained her experience. Something within me recognized in this dear shape of Meher Baba the incarnation of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. The unbelievable had become a revealed fact. I gave my will to his will, my life to his cause of truth and love, knowing that to love the truth means to live it.
Well, thank you, Betty, for
Yeah.
stepping in. I'm back. I'm on Christopher's computer. I don't know what happened to mine, but and I will go to what I think was the stopping point, and I think that I was saying that uh, she became increasingly aware of Baba with her, and in that perfect surrender to him, she had true gratitude. And I wanted to read something she wrote to Baba at that time, where she expresses this gratitude. Beautiful passage from one of her letters to Baba. She says, I am so endlessly, profoundly grateful to you, beloved Baba, for all you have done for me since I suddenly collapsed. Only you knew how much I needed your help, particularly as to keep the center within, which was the most important and helpful thing in my distress and sleepless nights and anxiety. What I would not do and give to have you right here, to see you again, to fall at your feet as a thirsty wanderer, to drink from the source. So you came in spirit and heart, helping all along. So on April 11th, 1946, Nadine's breathing became so labored that she had to be taken to uh, the emergency room at a hospital. And Norina, Phyllis, and Adele were there with her. And Phyllis recalls her blue eyes blazing, her lips silently repeating Baba, Baba, Baba inside the oxygen tent. And she passed away on the morning of Palm Sunday, April 14th. And Baba responded with a cable. Nadine is now living in me, with me, for me, uh, more than ever. Nadine is now living with me, in me, for me, more than ever. And Narina then wrote to Baba and said, uh, her inner experience of life surrender was fully expressed in every hour of her martyr-like life. She knew the meaning of herself in surrender. She understood all that we might ought to understand while living in this world. Her love for you was so pure, so true. She gave no one the false impression of having merely the mental desire to fall at your feet. She left without bargaining her life in your hands, beloved. So they sent her ashes to India, and she was interred at Meherbad Hill in June 1947. Baba had instructed Pindu when word came to create her tombstone, her gravestone, and Baba asked that these words be engraved on it. Her happiness was Baba. And Baba told them that this had to be finished before Elizabeth and Norina came to India in July. And it was. And meanwhile, Norina, back in New York, gave a thought transmission in the voice of Baba, and she instructed that Nadine's possessions be placed in trunks and her furniture be sold to those in need. And then she said, the thought transmission says, the room of Nadine as space can only be used when I come myself, she's talking about Baba, and occupy the house with my disciples. And Baba said the walls were to be washed and painted before he arrived. Well, Nadine's room, in other words, was to be made ready for Baba. And yet, for Nadine, in illness and in ecstasy, Baba had already been there. Jai Baba.